It's a great privilege for me to be here today. I'm from one of those Sydney institutes that Paul mentioned. I think he said it with a smile, which is good. But I do take every opportunity when I'm invited to come to Perth. I've been to a number of these meetings, and I think they're fabulous meetings. And I wish we could have actually something similar in Sydney. It's really obvious they bring together people across all different sectors, both from research to programmatic, and really talk about what's important. I was given the task today to talk about something, I was given sort of basically a broad range of things I could talk about, which is probably not the best thing to do for someone like me. But I got some bit more focus. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about some issues, I guess, which are occurring at a national level related to HIV and sexual health. So I'm from the Kirby Institute, and for those who don't know, the Institute is based at the University of New South Wales. It has a staffing level of about 300 people, focusing largely on HIV, STIs and blood-borne viruses, but also other infectious diseases. And one of our key tasks is to produce something you probably have seen, which is the annual surveillance report. So this is a report which we get funded from the Australian Government to do this work, and it's in collaboration with all states and territories, WA. And this report really outlines and brings together a whole range of data sources across Australia which are collected at a local level. So it includes the notification data, which gets reported in WA, includes behavioural surveys, such as none we'll speak about next, and a whole range of other data on testing and treatment. So today I'm really just going to pull out the key highlights from that report, and really with a focus on the national strategies, which are about to be released, hopefully very soon. They're in their final stages, I believe, and we'll get these reports very soon. But these strategies give us some goals to work with, or work towards. And so for HIV, it's this ambitious goal, it's elimination of HIV by 2022. And same for hepatitis C, quite ambitious elimination goals. And STIs, it's more on the control front, but still aiming for reductions. So when thinking about those diseases, if I go back to it, they come with challenges, and I was trying to find something in Google that would represent challenges, and this actually came across first, and I didn't want you to think that I like naked men all the time, but the point of it was not about the naked man, which may be appealing to many people. It was more about working as a team. So, for thinking about the national strategies, each state really needs to do as much as they can to work towards elimination, and collectively as a nation, then we can have the best successes of achieving those elimination goals. And then that's states and territories. Within the states and territories, it's also thinking about how we can make the best use of our resources and working together as teams to implement some of these strategies and tools that are available now that can help us reduce some of these infections. So I'm going to start off with HIV. Most of you will be familiar with this graph. It's the number of HIV diagnoses which are reported each year in Australia. So these have been collated for more than 25 years now, and they come from the hard work from every state and territory who collect these data, and they report it at a national level, and then they're synthesised and reported in what I mentioned, the annual surveillance report. So each year, you can see in Australia, there's around 1,000 people who are diagnosed with HIV, a preventable infection. Between 2007 and 2011, which you can see in the purple, the numbers were actually increasing. And this is quite concerning at that time. From 2012 to 2016, the numbers of diagnoses have started to stabilise. So you can interpret that in many ways. Perhaps that's a good thing, they're not increasing any further, but you can also say it would be nice to see a decline. In regards to the numbers, consistently each year, about 3/4 of the diagnosis are among men who have sex with men, that's the green, and about 20% from heterosexual contact. But that does vary by state, and in WA and South Australia it's a larger proportion from heterosexual contact. So that hasn't changed very much in all that time, but that stabilisation in the last few years has really sort of driven a whole lot of conversations about how we can drive down infection. So what is really needed now in Australia to start to see a decline? And there's many other countries across the world that have started to see decline. So what does Australia need to do to start to see a reduction? So just to show where WA fits in to other states across Australia, these are the notification rates, and I mentioned rate here because different population sizes across Australia need to present rates, not numbers, of course. So these are the data from New South Wales. So if you went back into the late 1980s, New South Wales would by far have the highest rate of HIV. It was sort of the epicentre of HIV at that time. So this is now the last 10 years, and what you can see is New South Wales and Victoria have actually quite similar rates. The numbers will be different, but we've taken into account the population size. They're pretty similar in regards to their notification rate, but as you can see for the overall of Australia, there's sort of not a lot of change in the last 5 years, perhaps a slight reduction in New South Wales. Queensland, quite similar. You can see there compared to New South Wales and also Victoria, and here's WA. So WA has actually had lower rates traditionally, perhaps until about 2015. There has been a slight increase in the notification rate, but still lower than some of those other states. But the main concern for HIV is we're starting to see divergences. So there's diagnoses which have been stable in the last 5 years, but that's not the case for every population. There is quite substantial differences, and these are really a couple of graphs which highlight some of those differences. This is according to country of birth and focuses on men who are diagnosed with HIV who acquire their infection through male sex. And the yellow is men who are born in Australia. So men who are born in Australia, similar to the national rate, it's pretty stable, perhaps a bit of a decrease in the last few years. But for men who are born overseas, and these are menosexual men who are born overseas, a very different picture. So a 64% increase in the last 10 years among men who are born overseas. And this increase has been largely among men born in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. So really highlighting that our responses need to be much more nuanced and tailored to populations, and particularly to try and address this increase that's been observed among men born overseas. And the same, you've probably seen this graph before, this is showing another divergence, and that's in regards to Indigenous people in Australia. So there's always been graphs in the report which highlight very high rates of bacterial infections, but in the past 5 years in Australia there's been a really concerning and significant increase in HIV diagnosis, and this is the rate for Indigenous people compared to Australian-born non-Indigenous. And James may be here today or later on. We'll probably talk about this much more, so I won't go into this. I'll leave him to talk about this, and I also am not talking about syphilis either, because I think James will be talking about that. But I guess the point of this is, even when you look at data at a national level, you really need to drill down into the nuances of the populations to understand how they might differ from other populations. And these are, I guess, two examples where across Australia it really emphasises the need for greater levels of activity and promotion for these two populations. Okay, so what's being done? So as I mentioned, notifications for HIV have been stable in Australia, and many people have attributed that to Australia's been quite successful at getting high levels of testing and treatment compared to many other countries. So the United Nations, they have goals that in Australia we want 90% of people who are diagnosed with HIV, 90% of people living with HIV who are diagnosed, so everyone should have a test. And of those people who get diagnosed, everyone should be on treatment, so they set the 90% level. And then of those people who are treated, 90% should have an undetectable viral load. So that's like a global target. Australia's been pretty close. We're not quite there on the treatment side of things, but we're very close to the 90-90. Although just as you get close, things shift. So now it's set at 95, 95, 95. So still a bit more work to do. But despite that, so there's been a great amount of work across the sector to try and increase testing and treatment. I can't talk about all the work that happens, but a significant amount of effort to increase testing and treatment. But despite that, there hasn't been a decline. And I think from the modelling it would suggest if we hadn't had that extra effort in regards to testing and treatment, we probably would have seen notifications increase further. So I think most people in the sector and the modelling supports it would conclude that this high level of testing and treatment has been really important to keep notifications at a level playing field. But to increase HIV, obviously PrEP is important. So many of you would be familiar with PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's a tablet that's been used as a primary indication for HIV treatment. But now, for many countries across the world, it's been used as a preventative way. So it's been used in a way where people who are HIV negative, who are considered at risk of HIV through sexual practices, they're provided with a tablet to take every day, a bit like an oral contraception pill, and it protects them from HIV. And there's very good evidence to support its efficacy as long as people take their tablets, and there's high adherence. Because of this very strong evidence, many, or just about all all governments across Australia decided, this is sort of an unprecedented thing that occurred, they decided to fund programs at a local level. They, in a way, decided to fund the treatment that wasn't subsidised by the PBS. So most programs which are treatment, governments would wait for the medication to go on the PBS or be subsidised, and they would focus on implementing the program. But because of the strong desire to start to turn around HIV and a lot of strategies about elimination, most governments across Australia decided to basically go for PBS and to fund PrEP for people who are at risk of HIV. Many of these programs started around 2016. In WA, it's been in the last year. There's many people in the room here involved in the WA PrEP program. Then what happened, I guess, for anything to get on the PBS, which is a pharmaceutical benefit scheme, it requires some good information about cost benefit. So Richard Gray, who works at the Kirby Institute, he conducted a cost effective analysis and really gave some good information about what would be the cost that would make this cost effective in Australia, and it was obviously much lower than what the companies had suggested it would be, as you can imagine. And then good news, I guess, is everyone would know that PrEP is now listed on the PBS as of the 1st of April. So this is, I guess, a big change in regards to HIV prevention. We not only have tools such as condoms and testing and treatment, but there's now PrEP, which is subsidised through the Australian government. And so there's state-funded programs across Australia are now in a phase where they're transitioning. And I think in New South Wales it's going to happen in the next 3 months, and I'm just talking to Lewis before, I think it's more scheduled for later on in the year in WA. And so essentially people will be able to access their sexual clinics or primary care and be able to begin a prescription like any other medication which protects them from HIV. But I started off with the challenges, and I just want to put forward just a few things to think about in terms of PrEP going forward. So PrEP is a really important tool and provides us perhaps with an unprecedented opportunity to try and reduce HIV in Australia. But there's a few caveats about PrEP. So PrEP is really not that different to immunisation. Like the goal of PrEP is to provide access to the largest population that you can who are at risk of HIV. And if you can increase access to, say, 90% of that population, it creates something like a herd immunity effect that you're very unlikely if you're having sex with someone, you're very unlikely to come across someone with HIV. They're either on PrEP or they maybe they have HIV but they're on treatments and they have other technical rates. So that's the first point, that it needs to reach a very high proportion of the population. The other key point is it needs to be scaled up quickly. So scaling up sort of PrEP quickly, which means trying to get it out to as many people as you can in a few years, is really important because you reach that herd immunity in a much quicker stage. And then the other factor is adherence. So for PrEP to work, people need to be taking tablets at the schedule, which has been to date daily, but there's a number of factors in thinking about intermittent PrEP. And then condom use. So I'm only going to touch on this, and I know Martin will allude to this a bit more in detail in his presentation. But the speed of PrEP is actually, it's quite significant in terms of how quickly it needs to be scaled up to have an impact. So if you're in a program and basically you make PrEP available and there was a bit of promotion, and 5 years down the track, maybe half the population took up PrEP, the target population, that would have a much lower impact than if you tried to do it in 2 or 3 years. But 2 or 3 years does require, there's a lot of considerations there. It requires resources, it requires clinical capacity, and a whole range of other things to try and achieve that. But it is very important that time frame, whether it's for 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years. So the beige line there, which you can see from the graph, shows that if you were to scale up PrEP to 90% of high-risk men in Australia, that took 10 years to do that, it would take you maybe 10 or 15 years to achieve the impact, compared to if you scale it up in 3 years, it may be more like 5 years. So that has a big implications for people, for preventing all those infections, but also for cost. Okay, the other point to consider is in terms of condom use. So there's a lot of discussion across Australia about, is PrEP leading to a reduction in condom use? What's the implications for sexually transmitted infections and also for HIV? So I'm only focusing on HIV. And what the modelling has shown, and I guess there are caveats with modelling, it's a little bit like financial forecasting, but perhaps with people with the right interests. But in terms of the mathematical modelling, it indicates that if you can scale up PrEP really quickly, then a reduction in condom use may not make a big difference. Because essentially in a short time frame, you've rolled out PrEP to a very large proportion of the population. So when you change your condom use, it's probably not going to make very much difference in that time frame. But the situation is a bit different if it took longer. So if it took you 5 or 10 years to scale up PrEP, then that has a potential implication for condom use, which you can see here. So this graph really shows the differences if a program was to achieve 50% coverage for PrEP, so that's the beige line, and there was a substantial reduction in condom use. So you can see that the reduction you would achieve in HIV would only be about half, compared to if there was a small amount of condom use or the coverage, which is 50%. So really sort of the key message is condom use will make a difference unless you scale up PrEP properly. And that's modelling. There's a lot of nuances to consider there, and modelling in itself is sort of indicative. So it sort of sets the scene about some potential issues to consider, but then we need to collect the real data through the behavioural surveys and really test whether this is the case. But it gives you some indication of things to consider, like if you're going to invest in programs, like do you focus on adherence, do you focus on scaling up quickly, do you focus on coverage, and how important are all those three things, also about condom use. Right, so most people are aware of the PrEP program in WA, and I'm not personally involved in it, but there are people here, so I won't speak to it too much. But I think the point in regards to PrEP in WA is they're well on their way to achieving a high number of people on PrEP and achieving that rapid scale up. So that's, I think, data that I asked Barbara Young, who works with Lewis and others from WA Health on the PrEP study. I think there's about 800 in this half a year, so that's a pretty fast uptake of PrEP. So if that continues, it has a potential to achieve that pretty fast scale up. And just finishing on HIV, there's always going to be a few more challenges. And these are data from New South Wales, which really emphasise the importance of nuancing and having culturally appropriate programs for PrEP. And what this table shows is the impact of PrEP in New South Wales. In 1 year after a rapid scale-up of PrEP in New South Wales, there was a 30% reduction in recent infections in monosex men in New South Wales. So that was the fastest and the most reduction that they had seen for a very long time. But there were differences across populations suggesting some inequity. So although the overall reduction was 30%, in young men aged 18 to 24, there was only a 10% reduction, suggesting that they weren't taking up PrEP as much as their older peers. And the same for men born overseas. You can see the overall reduction, as I mentioned, was 30%, but it was only 21% in men who were born in Asia, compared to 50% in men who were born in Australia. So again, you can see inequity there. Men who were born in Asia were not accessing PrEP perhaps at the same rate as their Australian peers, and it meant that the reduction in HIV was less compared to Australian born. And that if you go back to that slide that I presented earlier about diagnosis, there's an increasing number of diagnoses in Australia. If we were to try and reduce that trend in overseas born men, you'd actually want this to be the reverse. You'd actually be wanting to get PrEP uptake at a greater rate in Asian born men, not at a lower rate. And the same, interestingly, according to where people live. So men who are living in the gay suburbs of Sydney, and that's assigned according to postcodes, there was a 50% reduction in HIV in the year after the Epic New South Wales PrEP program was rolled out, but only 7% reduction in men who lived in other suburbs. So they're still in Sydney, but they weren't in the gay suburbs. So it suggests issues in terms of recognition and uptake long way over time. Okay, so moving along, so there I guess highlight a few issues in regards to HIV in terms of scale up a program and also considerations of trying to address some of those inequities. So then now moving on to gonorrhea, I think many people in the room would be familiar with the issue of gonorrhea. It's not just in WA, it's across the whole of Australia. And I'll just quickly go through these slides. I think you can see it without me even describing it, but in Australia, the highest rates of gonorrhea are in remote areas. However, and that's the axis on the right, so 600 per 100,000. So if you look at the axis on the left, that's for regional and major urban areas. The greatest increase in the last 10 years has been actually in urban areas, in major cities. So there's been a 415% increase in gonorrhea in young heterosexuals living in major cities. It's still a low rate though, so if you go back 10 years ago, it's still only about 1% of young people have gonorrhea. So that's still a low prevalence, going back in 2007. And it was at a low level that it really wasn't recommended for screening. But fast track to 2016, you see the increase there, and it's at a rate now which has gone over the rate that you see in regional areas. So how does that look for states and territories? Well, essentially it's occurred in all states and territories. Prior to 2012, it was largely attributed to the introduction of dual tests. So if you had a chlamydia test, automatically now you have a gonorrhea test. So that probably explained it until 2012. But by that time, all labs had adopted these dual tests. So going forward, it didn't really explain the increase, and the increase continued. But probably the most pronounced increase has been in WA. Sorry, Jennifer. And unpacking that a bit further, this is work that we did in collaboration with states and territories across Australia, trying to really get a sense of where the change had most occurred. So these are geographical maps, and they look at the rates in different statistical areas. And this is just one example from Melbourne, and then I'll follow on with an example from Perth. It really highlights that these are city maps, so this is for Greater Melbourne, and it's focused only on females. And what you can see is over that period of 2011 to 2016, it hasn't been a broad-based increase, it's been a quite specific increase in certain areas which is grown. So essentially when you look at the colours, it's going from the dark green to the yellow, and you can see that happening over time, with some particular areas having higher rates than others. And in Perth, a similar pattern going from lighter colours to darker colours, but starting out at a higher base level. So on the left, that's Greater Perth, and it's females. This is gonorrhea rates. You can see on the left that in Perth, there was many areas which were already into the light green. And then the one in the middle, some of those areas have moved into the yellow. And then the graph on the right, you can see that many have moved into the orange. And just in regards to the level of infections, that's sort of a rate of 100 to 300, which is about half of that seen in the remote. So that's quite high rates for city areas in regards to gonorrhea, and something which hasn't been seen for a very long time. So there's lots of hypotheses about why this might occur, and there's lots of articles by ABC and various other journalist companies about why, and some of them are a little bit hilarious. Anyway. But essentially, I don't think we have a very good handle on it. Common sense you would say it would probably be because of change of sexual behaviour in some way. What specifically has driven that? People would talk about theories such as, is it Tinder, is it travel, is it increasing sexual repertoire, is it more anal and oral sex, is it meeting different partners, is it not enough healthcare access, or a combination of all those things. And I still think the jury's out on that issue, but there is a research study being conducted in WA, and I think it's the only one that I'm aware of in Australia that's investigating this in this detail, which is going to look at this in a much closer way, and see the partners involved in this study. And it's going to look at genotyping, so really get a sense of how tightly clustered this outbreak is. Rowena and the team are going to do some interviews to get some context, like the context in which these infections have occurred, and also there's a case control study being made to really sort of pinpoint some of these risk factors. And this is important because it can guide health promotion. So, in terms of control of STIs, it's about education, health promotion, and also testing, treating, and contact tracing. So having a better understanding of the reasons why, even if they're quite basic reasons, really helps guide the resources in the direction of health promotion. But again, I can't help but put up a challenge, and that is in regard to testing and treatment. So the immediate response for any outbreak is to try and find people who've got gonorrhea and get them treated and get all their partners treated. And if you can do that quickly, then that's sort of happens in enteric diseases and any other infectious disease. It's sort of like your key sort of things that you do for an outbreak response. I guess just in regards to gonorrhea, there's and it's not sort of perhaps an immediate concern, but something that's important to consider, and that is about drug resistance. So Australia, ceftriaxone is still the first line therapy for gonorrhea, and it's nearly 100% susceptible, but there has been reports recently of a couple of multi-drug resistant strains who those two infections were unable to be treated with ceftriaxone. So that's the first line therapy for gonorrhea. And just quickly, you can see that graph there. Gonorrhea, it's a tricky bug. If there's any microbiologists in the room, they know this very well. It's a very tricky bug, and it evolves over time. And there's many antibiotics through the history of antibiotic use in Australia where it's developed resistance to, and it's been surpassed by another antibiotic. So you can see the evolution of the different antibiotics that have been used for gonorrhea. And so really, the point of that is to highlight that we need to be really careful about antibiotics and to preserve them. So if we've got ceftriaxone, which is an injection, we really want to keep that in place for as long as possible. So in terms of challenges, there's a lot of discussion at a national level and also internationally about how do we preserve ceftriaxone use. And these are some of the sort of ideas that are kind of others. And the first would be, well, maybe we can start reusing some of those older antibiotics that we discarded in the past. They developed some resistance, but they still can be used, so maybe we could do that. The only way you can do that, though, is by labs being able to provide clinicians back with real-time results on resistance so that they can make decisions on antibiotics quickly. And there's a research study being conducted, and a test that's going to become available later this year through a company called SpeedX, which should enable clinicians to be able to choose ciprofloxacin as an antibiotic instead of ceftriaxone, but that's sort of in the trial phase. And the other, I guess, key point is about using less antibiotics. I think there's, in terms of animal use and environmental use, that's probably a bit too hard basket. But in terms of sexual health, there is a bit of discussion among sexual health clinics about, is there ways that we can reduce antibiotic use? So many people come into clinics as their contacts of other people. They've been told by a clinician or their friends that you've been at risk, so come in and get some treatment. And generally across Australia, if you come in as a contact, you give them treatment straight away. You do the test and you get the result. So there's a number of clinics thinking about maybe those people who come in and don't have symptoms, you don't treat them straight away. You do the test and get the result, and that would preserve the ceftriaxone use for those people. But there's obviously got to be a lot of thought, and I'm sure there's some clinicians in the room who will have some ideas about this, but it does need to be considered quite carefully. All right, so just to conclude, so we've touched on STIs in the urban area, and just to finish off, I'm exceeding my time, but Rowan's, she's making me feel calm. So just to finish off and to touch on, so the issue in terms of gonorrhea in urban areas is significant. It's increasing. It's a large population in metropolitan areas, but the highest rates in Australia are in remote areas, and they haven't budged very much in a very long time. And the highest rates are among very young Indigenous people in Australia. And actually, adolescent Indigenous people in Australia have the highest rates. So you can see just some graphs which emphasise this. On the right, it's the notification rates for chlamydia among Indigenous people living in remote areas compared to their non-Indigenous peers living in those same remote areas. And it's 5 times higher for chlamydia. It's 30 times higher for gonorrhea. And if you look at syphilis, it's even higher. It's about 100 times higher. So very much higher rates. And that's been recognised for many years, and there's a lot of people who have done a significant amount of work to try and address that, and I can't cover all that today, and there's lots of people in this room. James will be speaking about some new initiatives. The way that looks by jurisdiction, in the highest rates in Australia for Indigenous people is the Northern Territory, and then that's followed by WA, reflecting the large population of Aboriginal people who live in those remote areas. Also, you sort of have to take into consideration how much testing, so testing commitments, these graphs as well. But interesting what you see here, that so there hasn't been an increase, and even in WA, there seems to be even a slight decrease. So that's I guess a positive sort of take on it, but essentially the rates are very high, so there needs to be a lot of work and effort to try and reduce these STIs. And we don't have a vaccine for STIs, unlike something like HPV, so it really is about condom use, testing and treatment type programs. So just, I guess, an example of how the surveillance data have been into another program. Some of you would be familiar with this. There's people in the room that are looking at here. I haven't Brett Wally's here from ACRA. I couldn't see him, but there's a program called Tango. It was a trial that was conducted to try and see whether point-of-care tests could make a difference in remote areas. This came about because in discussion with many health services, and some of these are in northern Australia, they came and were talking to us about it would be great if we had point-of-care tests, because we see young people and it takes like a week or sometimes 2 weeks to get our lab results back because it's in the city, and then we find it hard to get them back, and also they're quite mobile. So is there some technology that we could get the result quicker and we could give them treatment quicker? And some interviews that were conducted with some of the staff of the services suggested it was hard for them because of all those issues of mobility, the effort involved in recall, and also the staff turnover. So around that time, fortunately, there was a bit of a paradigm shift in diagnostic technology. So new point-of-care tests got developed. So prior to this, most point-of-care tests for sexually transmitted infections were like a pregnancy test. But they're actually really inaccurate. So it'd be like, you'd probably get a more accurate result if you flipped a coin rather than doing a pregnancy test. But, there are reports in the scientific literature with titles like alarming, shocking, sensitivity and things like that, because really trying to get some advocacy about better diagnostic tests. So when this test came about, it essentially is like a lab test, but it's packaged up in a way that can be used in primary care. So it really changed the whole landscape in regards to diagnostic tests for sexually transmitted infections. And because of those very high rates and the desire for many of the services that we talk to have some of the technology, then the trial occurred in remote parts of Australia. There were 12 services, of which 7 of those were in WA. So as part of this trial, they used the technology programmatically, so they basically had the machine and they used it to treat people. And you can see on the right, these are some preliminary results which suggest it did improve the time to treatment. So it reduced the time to treatment within 2 days by half. So that was quite a big reduction in the time to treatment for those services that used it in the trial. The trials are sort of a research setting, so you always raise the question of how is this going to work in the real world? Like these are 12 services who are selected to be part of the study. Can this work in the real world? Is it going to be sustained? What are all the things we need to consider? So the next part of it was what we call Tango 2, and it stands for Test, Treat and Go. It is a more programmatic phase of it. It's funded by the Australian Government and WA Health in partnership with ACRA, other community Aboriginal organisations, government and laboratories and researchers. And it's now 15 health services in WA and other services in other states. And this time, the goal of it is really to see, you've seen from the trial it does make a difference. So how does it work in more of a real world setting? So the goal is to look at, is it sustainable? Is it acceptable? These are machines, many of the services have more than one point-of-care machine, and one have 3 or 4. So how do you get your staffing levels to work across those different machines? And who does the treatment and things like that, and the quality assurance and training. And the additional goal of this program is not only to look at the point of care, but to see can it be coupled with other strategies to increase testing. So just a little bit of preliminary data from the Tango 2 study. these are the number of point-of-care tests that have been conducted so far in the program. It's cumulative, so I'm trying to bias the data in any way. It's not the numbers per month, it's a cumulative number. And essentially it's showing that by March 2018 there are around 5,000 tests. So it's suggesting that these services are taking up the point of care, and they're taking up the point of care test quite well. There are some differences. There's a couple of services where it hasn't worked as well as others, and there's others who are really going gung-ho and using it in a really optimal way. And so this phase of the research is really trying to understand where it works well, where it doesn't work well, and what are some of the factors which influence it working well, and to really get a good understanding from the health service and the community about how they want to see it looking going forward. Just to conclude on the challenge, so I've mentioned point of care. So point of care is just treatment. So essentially when you're treating someone you have to have them tested to begin with. So point of care is important if you've got perhaps there's loss to follow-up, and you're not being able to get everyone treated. But if you've got low levels of testing, then you're not going to have a big difference in the population. So point of care really needs to be coupled with strategies which try and increase screening to very high levels. And the modelling again has suggested that you need to achieve a level of about 60 to 80% in a community where there's a very high prevalence of STIs to really make a difference. So that is a very high level of testing. It's not impossible. There are services across Australia who have done that. And there's Nunavut Health Council is one example. Also Tiwi Islands many years ago have achieved that level, but it does come with the need for resources, staffing, coordination, and really like a level of testing which involves testing in the clinic and testing outside the clinic to be able to achieve that 60 to 80%. So I guess I'll leave you with the challenge. I don't have the answers to that, but I know James will be talking a bit more about that in his presentation. But I guess without vaccines and acknowledging the importance of health promotion and education, testing and treatment is really what we're left with. So how do we best optimise testing and treatment in areas where there's very high prevalence? So in summary, I hope I have today given you some examples of how surveillance data can lead quickly to programs and research. Discussions in the taxi today with Graham Brown, we sort of reflect on the fact that in our area, we actually, we think often the research and the data does get translated in the programs much quicker than other areas. And that's because of the partnership that we're engaged in. We currently in a phase where we do have some new tools around and older technology. We have new point of care tests, we have PrEP, we know about test and treat. So really the focus now is about how we can best use those and really reach people perhaps who are suffering from healthcare access issues, from disadvantage, or a range of barriers which are leading to them not gaining access to these technology. So really the focus going forward from my perspective is about implementation research. So how do we understand where those gaps are? So who are the people who are missing out, and why are they missing out? So asking them about those reasons, through interviews and focus groups. Designing interventions that are tailored for the population. So there's obviously an issue which we've seen in terms of overseas born gay, bisexual men, and then designing programs which are community-led. Adapting those interventions and importantly, constant monitoring and evaluation to have the data available to be able to change those programs as they're implemented and to be flexible and responsive to other issues that might arise. So I'll leave you at that point and just like to acknowledge that there was a whole range of projects presented today, and I haven't listed names, but there's many people involved in these projects. I'm just sort of describe the actual teams here, not the individual people. But I do hope you enjoy the meeting, and it's not often like a dinner party. I don't often get to talk about sexual health, so I thank particularly SiREN for letting me come here and talk about sexual health among 100 people, and I hope you enjoy the conversations about sexual health in our very niche and special area of STIs, HIV, and also global viruses. So thank you.